Larry, the classroom is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome back to the University of Waterloo. Welcome back to the Faculty of Engineering. And in the strangest turn of events, I have actually been appointed to the Faculty of Engineering. And my office is in E7. Which means I get to say, welcome back to our faculty, something that I never in 1,000 years would have imagined could have ever turned out to be true. And it is true. So I am really pleased to see you. I'm really pleased to be here. This is my 44th year as a faculty member, so I'm pleased to be like anywhere. That's the truth. And I really value your presence this afternoon. We have, however, a somber subject to speak about. For my entire lifetime, like literally my lifetime spans basically the post-war world. And when I'm born, the process of creating an international trading framework was well underway. The senior democratic states of this planet had decided that after the 20th century's blood in the First and Second World Wars, it was time to do something different. It was time to pursue economic and political policies that did not involve beggaring thy neighbor, that did not involve advancing your country's interests over the interests of your neighbors and other countries on the planet. That was the model, that was the goal, that's what they were trying to do. And this process has been unfolding until almost yesterday afternoon. You know why it is no longer unfolding, and indeed no longer exists. Something that took more than half a century to be put in place has been demolished in the space of several months. To describe this as a global consequence is putting it like mildly. You know, ladies and gentlemen, you know in your own personal relationships that you can destroy trust with one sentence, with one single action. You can ruin the trust somebody else or your employer or your community has in you. And oh yes, you can get that trust back, but it will take a lot longer to recreate the trust than it ever took to destroy it in the first place. So we now face, best case scenario, years of rebuilding this. Since rebuilding it, we must. But for the moment, of course, we now are in a world without rules. We are a trading nation, particularly dependent on foreign trade compared to other countries. And now we are at risk. It's as simple as that. There's no ifs, there's no buts, there's no ands. Our principal customer and the largest economy on the planet has now, its government, has taken into its head to repudiate any past promise, understanding, treaty, agreement, or obligation. They are also, at the very least, twisting and distorting the Constitution of the United States and the legal framework which follows from it on top of everything else. That would be like applause on the Titanic, but yes, but that's what's happening. Now we have to try to understand the consequences of this, in particular for us. So, let's begin. I want to begin with a review of the Canadian economy. You knew I was going to do that. If you'd ever been in this classroom before, and by the way, some of you are actually back in your classroom. God, you're back in your classroom with still me here. Well, that's still we don't have like time warpish kind of stuff going on. So I want to begin just by a quick review of the state of the Canadian economy because it is the context the context within which we are operating. And of course, you knew I was going to have overheads. Look, unless you can't remember anything about me, and I remember stuff about me, and I would still use the old overhead projector, that machine, but the University of Waterloo's decommissioned the thing. It's a miracle they haven't decommissioned me. But but again, just to take a quick overview, what you have is the growth rate, real corrected for inflation for the 2024. As you can see, it is real, but that's an unspectacular 1.5%. We normally do 2, and we're kicking ass. We do 3. That's truly Canadian. Not bad, not good, not a disaster. Just plug it on, and you will see in the first quarter of this year, the only quarter for which the data is fully complete, it decelerated slightly. Be careful. Notwithstanding that number, most forecasters expect a mild recession within the next 12 months, potentially starting already in this quarter, almost certainly the third quarter, 2025. But notice that as of the end of the first quarter 2025, the output of the Canadian economy was at a historic high. So let's make sure we understand where we are. We are still, right now, producing, well, almost March anyway, producing more than we'd ever produced in our economic history. Look at the employment numbers, same kind of thing. The employment growth rate is stronger than the GDP growth rate. This has been true for the last several years, where our employment numbers are spectacular. They're spectacular by the standard of Europe. They are spectacular by most of the industrial world. The United States manages to match them for reasons we'll talk about in a moment. And you also need to notice that employment number, which is also at a historic high, so that when there was employment growth also in the first quarter 25, that took our employment to record high. We've never had that many people working in Canada's economic history. So those are key numbers to keep in mind. Now the third set of numbers up there is also worth noting, because we've actually expanded the labor force faster than we've expanded output. Now, the math is really clear. If you expand the number of workers you have faster than you expand your level of output, the output per worker must be falling, since mathematically it could do no less. That means, of course, that output per worker, which is also a proxy for standard of living, is not at its historic high. In fact, it's been eroding over the past several years as we've had rapid employment growth and much slower GDP growth because of relatively low productivity growth, output per worker, which is another way to look at this, so that there has been an erosion of the Canadian standard of living over the last 3-4 years. 3-4 years, not 3-4 decades, so let's not get carried away. But we are not going to deny the fact that that represents a challenge to our standard of living. Now, it's driven by a variety of circumstances, not the least of which is the how do you describe the competence of the government of Canada with respect to, well, anything, but with respect to immigration. Immigration, which has been one of the great strengths of this country for goodness sakes, without immigration, we would basically hardly have a country. The immigration has been our claim to fame. We have managed to have high levels of immigration with social integration, little political controversy about those immigrants. For most of the past 20 years, the majority of the population, like a strong majority of the population, described immigrants as a net economic benefit to Canada, which in fact they are. But that social support is really important. Then, of course, the government failed to keep track of the people coming in, the number of people coming in, or much of anything else that was going on as it related to the immigration file, and managed to disrupt the colleges, managed to disrupt the universities, all in this process because they apparently can't count. And they couldn't tell us at one stage of the game, they could not even tell how many temporary students and workers were in the country, which is utterly preposterous. So part of that erosion of productivity arose from a mangling of the immigration policy. Now, that's sort of quickly where we are, sort of as an overview. So output employment record high, output per worker not at a record high, an issue that needs to be addressed. We will get to that also before we conclude. Yes, I have to talk fast because there's a whole lot of stuff to talk about. The data on the end we're going to come back to because it is extremely relevant. Your government is going to have to take aggressive action to guard your interests in the trade wars which are approaching. It's as simple as that. The forecasts suggest a moderate recession coming up, But that's because they expect both the Bank of Canada and the Government of Canada to lean into this and moderate the economic contraction that would otherwise occur. Now, the next logical question to ask yourself, review. Okay. You see, in my fantasy world, I have a little pop quiz now, except I'm so afraid. No, I'm afraid that you'd break my heart. So I'm going to answer my own questions. So you need to notice that those numbers at the bottom reflect your government's ability to actually have fiscal firepower. Can it actually do something? Does it have the resources to address the recessionary pressures that are going to inevitably occur? The answer is yes. And why? It is because we actually occasionally do things right. We even occasionally do them. It's not a word you usually use in a word when you're talking about Canada. Emphatically. No, we normally do wimpies, a little this, a little that, not too much, anything for fear of scaring ourselves. But one of the things we did, and we sustained this over multiple governments, including of multiple political persuasions, two political persuasions, the Liberals and the Tories, we managed to bring down public sector debt significantly. I cite you the 1992, which is not the historic high. The historic high, of course, at the end of World War II. How would that not be true? But if you take the modern historic high, it was around there, as the previous governments had lost control of any semblance of spending. And so we decided, conservative Canadians that we are, we got easily scared, and apparently we got scared enough with the deficit and the debt that we actually decided to restrain ourselves, and you elected governments to do this. Amazing. In one way, it's amazing, but just notice that reduction is not minor. Public debt, total public debt, in provinces, cities, and the federal government included, was at a strong high, at 87% of GDP. Now, the World War II was above 100, but this is still extraordinary for a non-war environment. And you can see the division between the federal and the provincial, municipal, the federal, of course, being the largest share. And now you see the most current number for which we have data, and you will see basically it's been halved. That's quite a spectacular accomplishment. And now you see the importance of doing it. You know, there are times where, even if you don't know what the future is coming, you just, like the squirrels, put a few nuts away for the winter. And can't you see that Canadian squirrel? I just can. Oh, all right, a beaver if you insist. Putting their little wood sticks under the water as they prepare for winter, or whatever stupid analogy you want. But extraordinarily useful for us now, and a proof of the value of virtue. Now, I'm glad you're seated, because before we finish, we are going to look at the fiscal position of our adversary. And we will see the picture is really quite different. So, that's the current situation. Now, for the rest of the time, I need to talk about trade. It is a subject of the moment, and it is our destiny. Always has been, and shall continue to be. The United States of America is now I have to operate this machinery, and everybody knows me operating machinery is not a good plan. It takes me great effort to speak of the government of the United States. It takes great effort to refer to its president, who has told each person in this room that everything I have taught them is wrong. Sorry, he's right or I'm right. There's no middle ground. There is no middle ground. If you're Canadian trying to find a middle ground, there is no middle ground. It's yet one or the other. Trade was analyzed extensively. Every single term I taught macroeconomics in this room. And we present it as a net benefit to all of the players together. Now, and there is, in the course notes, sections about common fallacies as it relates to foreign trade. And we discussed deficits. We did discuss deficits. I did not ignore deficits. We discussed those friggin' deficits. And we pointed out the mythologies about deficits. Do you actually, now, I have to cope with the President of the United States saying, and here's a direct quote because it's like seared into my brain. Trade deficits are, to me, notice this phrase, to me, not to experts, not to scholars, not to the economists in the employment of the government of the United States, those still remaining in any event, is to me a loss. For goodness sakes, he's taking the trade deficit as if it was the profit and loss statement of a country, which, whatever it is most assuredly not that. There is, and has been, a gargantuan trade deficit with the United States in trading relationship with the rest of the world for a long period of time. For the long period of time in which the U.S. economy grows faster than most of the other economies on Earth, we approach its rate of growth. But largely speaking, if you exclude China, we'll get to China in a minute, let's do one thing at a time, ladies and gentlemen. If we exclude China, the U.S. growth rate of the mature industrial states has been exemplary. But according to the presentation in the historic Rose Garden, on what was billed as a day of liberation, I can think of a different phrase, by the way. Day of ruination comes to mind. I stole that from The Economist magazine, so that's not courtesy of me. Presented as having brought America to its knees. Now, how? You can have one of the most rapidly growing economies on Earth with, as it turns out, one of the highest standards of living on Earth, highly unequal distribution of income, but that's on America, not the world, by the way. How this deficit has brought them to their knees, or not, as the case may be, defies common sense. It is the cuckoo cloud land in which this is all being conducted. Don't ask me to make sense of it. I'm struggling to make sense of what we can do in these circumstances. But just so you should notice, if in a government which is obsessed by this, by the way, obsessed with it, and they rarely use numbers. You should know. No. There are economic models at the Federal Reserve, at the regional banks of the Federal Reserve, on Wall Street, and in the Department of Commerce. You know, economic models created by economists who graduate with PhDs from the universities of the world, including Harvard, of course, under siege now. Of course, they're PhDs from Harvard, so what can you expect from the PhDs from Harvard, one of the oldest and most prestigious universities in America? Never mind that little detail. All of those models are being ignored. I guarantee you that every single tariff number you see, not, of course, that they stay the same, but whether they stay the same or change does not matter, because they come from nowhere. They do not come from a model. They do not come from analysis, and nobody's actually run a model predicting what will happen, because, of course, it would predict bad news for America, so naturally the models are not run. You just have this assertion of numbers which are basically made up apparently at 3 o'clock in the middle of the night while you are on the social media and a number occurs to you. I would have thought, however, that if you were actually trying to do something serious about the deficit, you would actually notice which countries are involved. As you can see, there is a disproportionate deficit being run with China, a very large deficit, being run with Mexico, and then the rest of us. Oh, my word. And then there is poor little Canada here. Really, you can see what a threat we are to our neighbor. Bring them for friggin' knees. Notwithstanding the length of the relationship between Canada and the United States, notwithstanding the social connections, family connections. My father was born in Brooklyn, for God's sakes, within sight of the friggin' Brooklyn Bridge. And I can become an American citizen if I renounce my Canadian citizenship. Not that I'm going to do that. And I am, according to the lower courts, entitled to run for President of the United States. So don't tell me there's some anti-Yankee bias here. I'm just trying to make sense of this lunatic policy which defies the self-interest of America. Well, it's bad enough to say it's affecting the self-interest of Canada, but it's affecting the self-interest of one of our principal customers, which is disadvantageous to us, never mind to the family and other friend connections we may have to the United States, never mind our treasured properties in Florida. I might add. So, we need to talk about China for a moment in this context. As these trading relationships were built over the post-war period, let's be clear, there was a plan. It was a plan difficult to execute. It moved forward in fits and starts, still moved forward, but it bumped, it ground. There were many challenges. There were difficult issues avoided, some evaded, some basically repudiated. We wanted, and the goal was, and the goal still is, to have fair relationships, trading relationships among countries. That individual companies and individual workers compete with and offer best of class to the world, making us all better off. However, it's not about tilting the marketplace by, for example, public subsidies, public regulations. So let's get rid of tariffs, good thing, but let's add a whole bunch of non-tariff barriers. So there was a fair bit of cheating. Yes, your country cheated too. A little bit on the America. Oh, well, you know how Canadians would cheat. Just, cheat enough to be there, but not cheat so much to actually aggravate yourself. Other countries cheated more aggressively. In the original free trade agreement between Canada and the United States, this is already acknowledged. This, of course, is an old agreement, not in force anymore. And it acknowledged that there is cheating going on. And so it was believed appropriate that the next stage of managing the relationships between Canada and the United States, and also the same thing had been adopted at the World Trade Organization, the WTO, the successor to the General Agreement on Tariff and Trades, the GATT, which you know about. Review. And so it was to now start, the tariffs were almost at zero. Now we start removing the non-tariff barriers. And we undertook, as part of that agreement with the United States, and there are parallel things going on at the WTO, to begin the next stage of removing the unfair advantages, which usually involve governments mucking around. And nothing happened. That, of course, has proved to be one of the weaknesses. Two fatal mistakes were made as we put this in place. The generalized cheating, nobody could find a way to address it. It was this crazy thing. And I remember standing in this friggin' room, playing a little game with a student. I can pick on you. Got picked on someone randomly. It kept you all awake because you never knew when I was going to suddenly be in your face pointing at you. I said, we should both stop cheating. And in this dialogue decades ago, we said, okay, we'll both stop cheating. Now, but if I stop cheating before you stop cheating, then you're going to steal some of my marketplace, right? So, okay, we're going to cheat. We're going to stop cheating, right? And we'll count down, okay? 3, 2, 1. Then we stop cheating. 3, 2, 1.9, 1.8. It is a game we played because I was trying to make the point of how difficult it is to actually get this to stop. Because you've got to really be careful. Tariffs are easy because they're public and you can say, okay, on January the 1st, we'll make the tariff go to 1% or whatever. The cheating is hidden. It's buried in regulatory language. We know what lawyers can do with language, do we not? Well, that is in fact a problem. And there was no political will to tackle this. and economies are growing strong, so this risk of imbalances caused by cheating was rising. And the cheating was rising, by the way. The European Union is now a bloc, and it thinks cheating is a fine plan. And then we say to the People's Republic of China, welcome to the world. That was the right thing to do. Absolutely. And the explosion of productivity, a standard of living in China, is admirable from the world's point of view by any standard you care to adopt. To have such a large proportion of the planet's population living in medieval dire poverty was outrageous. So yes, come in from the cold, said Richard Nixon, and China, to its credit, decided. Amazingly enough, these ancient old men, I'm very sensitive on the subject of old men, by the way, but those last old men, those compatriots of Mao Zedong, yes, they said yes, and open to the world. Now, unfortunately, of course, they took the European Union as their model and decided that cheating was a good plan, too. Well, they did. And we benefited from the cheating because we got a lot of cheap stuff. So there's a short-term harmony of interest. But consumers will turn a blind eye to the fact that when you compete with a Chinese enterprise, you are competing with the Communist Party of the People's Republic of China, in effect. And they are dedicated, they are determined, they are smart, and they know how to cheat. Now, so does the European Union. So does the United States of America. Oh, some of you are familiar with, the font of technology in our modern world. Don't you engineers look at me like you don't know what I'm talking about. As my colleague said, I've taught 10% of the alumni of the university. And I actually taught 20% of the alumni of engineering, because my class has always been skewed to you characters. There it is, this beacon of light that is now going to lead us to machines smarter than we are in a world in which, well, who knows? It is, of course, Silicon Valley. Yes. Silicon Valley, which exists solely and 100%, for anyone who cares to read a history of it, from the U.S. Department of Defense. Look, if I take enough money and pour it into one small area, you know what'll happen? Smart people need money to build things. And smart people will go to where the money is. And if the spigot is pouring out lots of money, do talented people come. And talented people with money can do cool stuff. They did cool stuff. They are doing cool stuff. Now, they waste a prodigious amount of money while doing cool stuff, but let's leave that aside for the moment. So, you see, the problem is, if you are trying to bitch about China's subsidization of its industries, the heart of the America's claim to fame, its great iconic companies are subsidized by the government of the United States in disguised ways as would ever go on in the People's Republic of China. Just a little more fancy rhetoric attached around it. Oh yes, there's SpaceX, a government contractor. By the way, just I can't talk about St. Elon. He'll give swear to God I'll get indigestion. So, the difficulty is that the marketplace was distorted. The cheating has become egregious in some cases. And China is a large player in it. Mexico helps for other reasons. It was logical and prudent for the United States to say, we really got to get serious about these artificial trade barriers, ours and yours. And we will have to actually do something about it. So let's get at it. Now, that would have been a rational, reasonable, appropriate to the circumstances policy. As you know, that is, of course, not what's happening. The other mistake made as we built this international framework, also discussed in this classroom. By the way, this is not a self-congratulatory tone as much as it sounds like it is, because I was simply reporting what was the state of the art. I didn't invent these ideas. I was simply teaching them to you from what expert opinion said was true. So I pointed out that one of the challenges of lowering trade barriers, when economies are protected, you lower the trade barriers, but the workers are put at risk. It is therefore essential, when this happens, to provide public support to help the workers adapt. That there's individuals can adapt using some of their own resources, but if these are big changes, and they are big changes, and they're relatively quick, then you need public support to help adjust, to help adapt. Now, most of the industrial world adopted a variety of social welfare spending measures to protect the most vulnerable among their citizens from all these storms of the trade war, of the trade readjustments, with one exception. And you know what country was the exception, which are now large, disaffected electorate, who were disadvantaged, and were offered minimal assistance. Not no assistance, but much less than the need required, which accounts for part of what is going on. Only part of it, but part of it. There are things moving below the surface that you should be mindful of. Now, what does the future hold? Since I'm taking a 12-week course and ramming it into 1 hour. So since I can't possibly resist doing so. First thing I have to note is that the administration of the United States, the current administration, will fail in its stated goals. It will fail in states' goals because half of them are inconsistent with the other half. So that's merely a statement of logic. That's not a forecast. That's like, 1 and 1 is 2, not 1 and 1 is 7. So, I'm going to stand with 1 and 1 is 2. So mutually exclusive goals, high rate of growth, low inflation, high taxes as tariffs, low taxes on rich people. The list goes on and on and on and on of things that all they won't fit together. So this all can't succeed. So what does the immediate future hold for us and for them? For us, blindingly clear, isn't it? My first job was as a federal public servant, working under a study mandated by the Prime Minister's office for the premiers of Canada. And part of what we were looking at was diversifying the the Canadian economy away from the United States. The old investment diversification strategy. Hardly a radical idea. The Prime Minister at the time, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, not to be confused with the other one, felt that was a strong, important public policy priority. If only they'd figured out what to do about it, if only they'd actually implemented a policy. Words are cheap. Policy, Prime Minister. Yes, I know you've been dead for a long time, but why didn't you do something about it? You were quite right. You were quite right. Yeah, well, quite right. So, I think we should pause for a moment and now look at our world. You're a major trading nation, disproportionately selling stuff to the United States. Because, shall we be honest, you Canadians, it's easy. It's convenient. They sort of speak English. They are one friggin' transport truck away from your plant, factory, or facility. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, easy, convenient. You do not have to stress yourself. Don't have to worry about cultural confusion. You don't have to worry that someone might speak a foreign language to you which would scare you. Easy choice. So, let's also notice another thing relevant to that circumstance. The United States believes, its government believes, one person believes. It is now one person. Not even a team of people. One person who apparently thinks 3 o'clock in the morning is the right time to make public policy for the world. Renders me nearly speechless, not speechless entirely. So, he has the belief that the world is going to deal with him. So, huge tariff, but he wants to make a deal. Want to make a deal with China? Huge tariff, make a deal with Europe. Huge tariff, make a deal with Canada, sort of, I don't know, who knows, or buy it or sell it or take it. Lord. And, as he said, quote, in only the exquisite language that the President of the United States could use, they're ready to lick my ass. That's how you get people to agree to do things. Humiliate them beforehand. He seems oblivious to the fact that having repudiated the previous understandings, treaties, and obligations of the United States, that anyone would care to believe that you'd keep the current, suppose Canada did a new relationship with the United States, made a new agreement of some kind. Who knows whether it would last for more than 6 months? Until he has another brain eruption. So even the dealing stuff. So in the Rose Garden, America was a disaster, but still everyone on earth is going to want to make a deal with America. And his vision of negotiation is, of course, to capitulate. And give him a present. Big one, preferably. So that means we should, don't you think, take a look at the world. There is, now too big. Oh, dear. Technology will drive me nuts, yes. There's the world. The world, is not just the United States. You Canadians, you US-centric people, you. Yes, you Canadian, you seem to think there are 2 countries in the world. 3 countries in the world. Canada, the United States, and the world. No, there isn't. There's more than 3. Of course, you at least think there are 3 in America. They actually think there's America and the world. There's, So I compliment you. Actually, you've got the number up to 3. But honest to goodness, look at it. Now, the United States is, by that crude calculation, remember, ladies and gentlemen, I'd come to this room, get very agitated about my numbers and the fact that they should be carefully and appropriately interpreted. And I'm starting with the crude number. This is GDP of those countries for the year indicated, calculated by taking their GDP and their local currency and then multiplying it by the U.S. exchange rate for that particular country. So it's basically the current exchange rate. And if the exchange rate goes up and down, all those numbers go up and down. Now, you know from common sense, no economy, no GDP of a country can go up and down by 2%. But that number would go up and down by 2% if the exchange rate could easily go up to 2%. So it's vulnerable to the exchange rate issue. So there it is. But that's what it still looks like, just to give you a flavor for a couple of things. Yes, the United States is the biggest economy on earth, not the only economy on earth. If you just even take the crude numbers and look at the 2, China and the EU together, they're bigger than the United States economy. Oh, you poor Canadians, you. If only you had someone else to trade to. Don't, really and truly, ladies, really and truly, do not tell me. It is the single richest market, that is the case. It is on your doorstep, that is the case. But it doesn't want your stuff anymore. And there's a huge world out there. And that's, What about the other countries? What about the other countries? You know, India. Oh, soon to be the most populous country on earth. Don't you think they need stuff? I think they need stuff. They're middle class. They're middle class. You know, middle class rival your incomes. Many, many times bigger than yours. That's because they're many, 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 many times bigger than you are. Yes, they get more poor people as well, but but you're selling, generally speaking, you're selling to rich people, not poor people, for instance. So, by the way, Mexico has a middle class that rivals the Canadian one. And they're like a long truck drive away. Like, how scary is that? And they'll speak Spanish at you. Oh, better stay in Canada and half speak English. Well, come on, ladies and gentlemen. So you cannot tell me that you have no opportunity. You cannot tell me there's no opportunity. You cannot tell me there's only one game in town. Possibly also the United States should pay attention to the fact that it's not just them. But of course, that's not the best number to use, right? So you want one that is the purchasing power parity one, right? By the way, even though I don't teach my weekly class, I have all my course notes, and I know that purchasing power parity is in those course notes. So don't you look at me like you've not heard purchasing power parity before. So, of course, you want to know what this looks like with purchasing power parity, where you correct for the fact that the price levels are different in all these countries, and you buy different amounts of stuff. So there you can see the order from larger through smaller. This is what it looks like when you use the actual numbers that are purchasing power parity. I thought it would be helpful to source them from the Central Intelligence Agency, which is, in fact, where these particular ones come from. There are purchasing power parity estimates, and this is a complex calculation, and so you'll get slightly different numbers from different organizations like the OECD, and some other commentators. But largely speaking, I took the CIA one just thinking, since if this is America's great obsession, we'll use their statistical agency, and we downloaded it before it's removed. You do realize that for health statistics, my colleagues at Canadian universities are downloading stats as quickly as they can, because some of them are disappearing from the U.S. Public websites, would you believe? And now it's a somewhat different picture, is it not? This puts China number one. Now again, at some level, it's important to recognize that there's simply an equivalent statement to say the U.S. and Chinese economies are very large, proportionate to the world, and equivalent to each other in any meaningful and operational sense. That's what it's saying. So we have another market, but you have to cross the ocean. That's kind of scary, but you know, must have crossed the ocean to get here in the first place. I think he didn't kill us to cross the friggin' ocean. So come, ladies and gentlemen. There sits a huge country. But look at the ones below. Like, we're a small, relatively small player. Yeah, we're still where we are at the bottom of that list. Now, by the way, lest you think, oh, poor, sad Kant, the bottom of this list of GDP, please also notice that of those countries up there, we're the small one. You know, so if you look at, Spain, you know, Spain, South Korea has a lot of people. By the way, just so you recognize that most of those countries above us, virtually all of them, have much, much larger populations than we are. So we punch above our population weight, for sure. But when we need to sell to people, how could you tell me there are no opportunities? Just, that would be difficult for me to understand. Ask you to notice that. We'll return to that in a moment. There is now, so our long-term future is that. But I want to pause for a moment and look at the next year, two-year time frame. Quite interesting. America, bless its Constitution. When in doubt, have an election. They love having elections. So they're going to have elections, now the midterm elections, less than 2 years from now. Less than 2 years from now, it is possible for the Democratic Party, if it ever got its act together, to take control of the Senate and the House of Representatives. Oh my. Then, of course, we'll have a constitutional crisis for sure, an attempted impeachment for sure, and the government of the United States moving into a near state of paralysis. Not, by the way, helpful necessarily. As if the world needs more chaos. Ladies and gentlemen, your own common sense tells you this. In moments of uncertainty, a sensible, rational, prudent person hesitates, waits for the dust to clear. It's sensible. In periods of uncertainty, be cautious. In periods of uncertainty, pause spending money. In period of uncertainty, pause making an investment. In periods of uncertainty, wait. And you know what waiting does to the marketplace. It slows it immediately. Washington is now an uncertainty machine. It cranks out uncertainty as its primary output. Let's change things, let's change things, let's change things, let's change things, let's change things endlessly. This puts the United States at risk of a recession. With one countervailing force we are about to get to. I'm saving the scary part for the end. There is this huge uncertainty that is already chilling the world's marketplace. By the way, the U.S. exports stuff too, so it is affected, of course, by chilling in any of its marketplaces. Never mind in its domestic marketplace. Consumer sentiment has been falling sharply and is below where it was at the beginning of 2024. So, what's the greatest risk to the U.S.? Because if it's a risk to the U.S., it's a risk to us. Because we can't decouple ourselves that quickly from it. We can't disengage that quickly from it. And and if the United States ends up in some kind of disruption, it disrupts the global economy, so then there's secondary effects on us. What is the great weakness of the U.S. situation? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's fairly clear. U.S. debt, oh my, they spend money like drunken sailors. That's the nominal GDP over the nominal debt of the United States over the past 100 years. You will see it's a historic high. You can see the angle is really quite, you're engineers, angles, you like angles, right? So you know what that suggests. U.S. economy has been growing very strongly, stronger than ours, because they're administering a massive Keynesian, remember him? Keynesian stimulation, hammering away at it. Our deficit's about 1.4% GDP. Theirs is between 6 to 7% of GDP is a deficit. That is of GDP, is the amount by which spending exceeds taxation. They really don't like paying taxes, but they do like spending money. So the result, of course, is they borrow money, and they've been borrowing money for a long, long period of time. Now, as you also know, review, that's not the right number to be using, right? Right? That's the wrong one. That's the one used to scare children with. We don't have children in this room. We have macroeconomically literate people. This is the number you want to look at. and that's debt percent GDP. Because as you can see, for part of that period of time, it was declining, really and truly. In the old days, like 1970, my God, before I was in this classroom, but not before I was alive, unfortunately. And there you will see the actual challenge. And there you will see their debt above 100% of GDP. I would note the United States is not at war with anyone. There's no huge emergency. We have fiscal firepower. They basically do not. And the bond markets, you see, have seen this. Interest rates are rising. Secretary of Commerce has actually taken into its head to say the U.S. will never default on its debt. Think about it. That's the thing you never should have to say. It's like saying to your neighbor, yo, neighbor, I'm not going to burn your house down. Would you not take for granted your neighbor's not going to come friggin' burn your house down? And if your neighbor said, I'm not going to burn your house down, you think, my God, I better be fenced because that guy's a lunatic. The very fact you have to deny something, the thought that the United States would repudiate its debt is unthinkable, would cause financial markets to basically melt down. And we're melting down. World's economy come to a halt within a month. That's how drastic it would be. You should not even have to say that. But he did say it. Because that's numbers starting to make people uneasy. So interest rates are rising. Yes, the Federal Reserve can lean against this, but there's a limited ability to lean against this when interest rates are rising and inflationary pressure is likely to rise in America because of the tariffs. Can you hear a ticking time bomb here? And it's a time bomb in the financial markets. During the past 6 to 8 weeks, both the stock market fell and the bond market fell. You can't... Look, if the stock market is falling because people are frightened, then frightened money goes to the bond market, which is the safe market. When both of the markets are falling and then the US dollar falls at the same time, that's a huge consequence. We do not know yet because it's clouded in obscurity. We do not know how much the Chinese government was selling the vast amount of US government debt that it holds. You know, before you engage in trade wars with people, you should notice that they owe a lot of your debt. Like, you know, you bad person, I owe you $100 billion, but like I'm going to hit you in the nose. Seems not to be a sensible strategy by any stretch of the imagination. So there we have this like ticking time bomb difficulty. So of course, into the breach, we send St. Elon. Who is going to save America all this money? So I thought I would just conclude by showing you there's the U.S. government spending. It's by percentage, it's percent of all total spending. Social Security, 22%. That's for old people. I like spending money on old people, so that's good spending. And look at item number 2. Net interest. Look at it, net interest. By the way, in 2023, this is the most current numbers we have for America. In 2023, oh dear, and I have to look at it myself so I don't forget. In 2023, interest payments were 11%, smaller than defense spending. Just notice what it equals. It exceeds defense spending, which itself in the United States is very high. It rivals Medicare, income security, and then, of course, the other things. By the way, you know, St. Elon, while crashing around, was trying to save trillions of dollars by basically being in these lower categories. I'm sorry, look at this, literally the case. Literally the case, trying to save trillions out of the, there is, as the comically called one beautiful bill moves through Congress. It hasn't not the law yet, not that of course appears to stop the president, but has to get through the Senate yet. By most estimates will add a huge amount to the deficit, lower taxes, add to the deficit, make the debt grow faster, contribute to rising interest rates. The risk of a financial accident somewhere is now rising. The situation is fragile. I don't like my markets to be fragile. This is our market as well, because this is part of the global financial system. And if the United States faces a serious crisis, it has little fiscal firepower. Besides gutting the administrative functions of the United States in homeland security, law enforcement, and other things, it is ill-prepared even for a major climate disaster, natural disaster, public health emergency, with a Secretary of Health who is well, he stands for anti-science, and you are men and women of applied science. So you either stand with science or you don't stand with science, but you can't stand with science to build a bridge and then don't stand with science and not inoculate your child and have people die from measles, for instance. So any emergency, no fiscal firepower, no intellectual firepower, at least in terms of in the administration of the United States government. So there you go. And of course, leadership is like, oh my goodness. Ladies and gentlemen, somber times. I would like, because you're here for your reunion, to offer happy words. And my job is to not let the young become so discouraged they give up. I say that I see a young face. Faces. You thought you were going to just blame it all on your poor brother. Yeah. But that's the point. There is a future here yet. But you can't offer a real promising view of the future by obscuring the reality of today. So yeah, high challenges today, somber times today. But this society has lived through them in the past, repeatedly, by the way, in the past, and I think it can do so in the future. There's one single thing we need to do. Are you listening, Mr. Carney? We have, for too much of our history, lived in the shadow of our big, older brother, who intimidated us by his size, by his bit of bravado, by his vibrancy, by his cultural richness, by his sheer size. And you have been intimidated. So, too cautious to go into the world, just go to familiar America. Too cautious to build your business empire in Canada, just build it big enough so you can sell it off to the boys in California, he said archly with respect to the students at the University of Waterloo. We're not good at scaling global companies. And the only reason for that is not because you're stupider, not because the resources aren't present. You are just cautious or intimidated. You young guys want to fix Canada? Don't be afraid, like too many of us have been. You know, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time Canada grow up. I think it's time we grow into the potential of the physical environment and resources and endowment we have. I think it's time that we grow up and grow the potential of the human talent which is here I really think it's time for us to grow up. Elbows up. Grow up. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You honor me. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Are you listening, Mr. Carney? Get at it. Thank you.